My name is Alara Dwyer. I'm 34 years old and I used to believe in partnerships, the kind where you stay up all night side by side building something from scratch. The kind where you split the stress, the hope, the equity. The kind where your name means something on every line of code because you wrote it, debugged it, and scaled it with your own tired, blistered fingers. Then, after 10 years of building with someone, I watched that person walk out of a courtroom with the house, the cars, the company, and the smug satisfaction of someone who thinks he got away with it. He left me with nothing. Except he didn't know he left me with the algorithm. Not just any algorithm. My algorithm, the one we jokingly called the ghost, back in our garage days, because of how elegantly it predicted and automated invisible patterns. It was born out of a research paper I wrote in grad school, refined across long weekends and red-eyed coding marathons, and finally matured into the engine powering the entire back end of his company. Well, our company, until the lawyers got involved. He made it all look like his, filed patents in his name, gave investor pitches with his face on the deck. And he did one thing that even now makes me clench my fists. He introduced my work as a collaboration with an early dev who's no longer involved. That early dev was his wife, me. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this part. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really like what I have to say here. The first night after the divorce was finalized, I stayed in a rental apartment with no furniture, just a mattress on the floor, my laptop on a cardboard box, and a half-eaten burrito next to a bottle of cheap wine. I didn't cry. I opened up my oldest encrypted drive and read the original code, Ghost V0. 3 alpha, and I felt something stir in me. It wasn't grief. It was clarity. See people like my ex-husband Fletcher, they never build anything. They package things. They polish and sell and posture. Fletcher always said I was the wizard behind the curtain and he was the showman. At first I took that as a compliment. Now I see it was a confession. And I remembered something else that night. Fletcher never touched the underlying code. He didn't even know what the recursive feedback loop I built into Ghost was really for. He only saw the results: more accurate predictions, smarter automation, seamless integration across messy enterprise systems. He never saw the mirror I left behind. The one line of code that pinged my private server every time Ghost's logic was updated. He didn't know I could still see everything: usage rates, deployment spikes, even some of the metadata tied to his premium clients. And he sure as hell didn't know I'd left a dormant branch of Ghost running in a sandbox environment, independent, encrypted, and off the books. I didn't plan revenge. I just wanted what was mine. But the funny thing about betrayal, it doesn't go away. It waits. It rewires the brain. It turns once forgiving hearts into calculus machines, measuring every opportunity, every silence, every weakness. So I built a new plan, quietly. It started with creating a separate copy of Ghost of Fork. I stripped away the parts tied to Fletcher's infrastructure, rebranded the core AI engine, and modified the heuristics to focus on B2B micro-automations, vendor optimization, scheduling, efficiency, adaptive resource mapping. I called it Spectre. It was leaner, smarter, faster. Everything Ghost wanted to be without Fletcher's glossy branding. Then came the domain registration. Spectre Labs. Yo. A few weeks later, I registered a Delaware LLC under a different name, one I knew Fletcher wouldn't recognize. I used a lawyer from D.C. who specialized in intellectual property battles and didn't ask many questions. By the end of the second month, Spectre had a functioning MVP, a white-labeled dashboard, and a clean pitch deck I drafted over cold coffee and insomnia. But before any of that, before I even thought about funding, I did one thing. I watched Fletcher's next keynote. It was at a tech summit in Austin. He wore a charcoal blazer, no tie, that overconfident smirk stretching across his face. "We're changing the way enterprises interact with predictive automation," he said. "And our proprietary AI engine is the most powerful on the market." I knew every line of that proprietary engine. I wrote it in a coffee shop while Fletcher ordered lattes and bragged to baristas about his startup. I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of every year I poured into that code. The late nights, the bugs I fixed while he slept, the meetings I prepped so he could shine. And now, here he was, celebrating a $1 billion valuation off something he stole. That was the last moment I felt anything close to heartbreak. From that point on, it was execution. I didn't want pity, I wanted leverage. Now get in the mood to listen to this story, because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. The next phase of Spectre wasn't coding, it was silence. I didn't need to outrun Fletcher. I needed to outweight him. Men like him, they crash under the weight of their own ego. All I had to do was give him a little nudge and be ready with a net to catch the pieces. A net made of code contracts and carefully planted doubt. First, I ran an audit on my own fork of Ghost Spectre. I combed through every line with surgical focus, making sure nothing remained that could be traced to our original company repo. Fletcher's lawyers were aggressive but lazy. They were used to sending cease and desists to nervous interns, not ex-wives, who had the original architecture backed up across 4 air-gapped SSDs in 3 cities. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was preparing a weapon he wouldn't see coming until it was too late. Once I was sure Spectre was airtight, I contacted someone I hadn't spoken to in 4 years. Cal Ramirez, a VC I briefly dated before Fletcher and I got married. Cal wasn't just an investor. He was the kind of guy who bet on people more than products. He didn't need a demo. He needed a look in your eye that said, "I've already done it." We met at a rooftop bar in San Francisco. I wore my best bluff. High heels, red lipstick, calm confidence. Cal grinned when he saw me. "Ilara Dwyer, you vanished." "I was married," I said, sipping my old-fashioned. "But I'm back." We didn't talk about Fletcher. Not directly. We talked about market gaps, AI scalability, the growing fatigue of enterprise systems choking on legacy code. I told him I'd built something agile, scalable, and invisible, a true plug-and-play AI brain for ops automation. I showed him a beta dashboard with 3 test clients, all simulated, of course. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't just build a product. You built a counterweight." I didn't smile. I built a shadow. 2 weeks later, Spectre Labs had a $2 million pre-seed round. No press. No splash. Just wiring instructions, a Delaware mailbox, and enough capital to hire 2 back-end engineers, a designer, and a fractional CFO. Everything moved in the dark. Meanwhile, I watched Fletcher's company FTR Technologies gain momentum. New rounds, press coverage, podcast interviews where he waxed poetic about the future of artificial intelligence and human synergy. He even named their AI model Fletch, as if he coded it himself. Cute. What Fletcher didn't know is that his success made my job easier. Every new client he landed, another proof of concept Spectre could quietly mirror. I set up private demos using anonymized data and recreated client results within 96% accuracy, sometimes better. But I didn't sell Spectre. Not yet. Instead, I gave it away. Quietly, surgically, I offered early access to CTOs and consultants I'd met over the years. People who respected me. People who hated Fletcher. People who'd never question why Spectre worked so well, it just did. No bugs. No outages. No bloated codebase. One called it the ghost in the machine. I smiled at that. At night, I still slept on a mattress on the floor. I still didn't own furniture. My fridge contained almond milk, leftover takeout, and a bottle of overpriced sparkling water. But on my hard drives, power. And Fletcher. He was busy prepping his IPO. That's when I decided to test him. It started small. A synthetic bug in the Ghost backend, one that looked like a deployment issue, but was actually triggered by specific data clusters that only large-scale clients would generate. When the bug activated, it triggered a slowdown in resource allocation predictions. Nothing catastrophic, just annoying, just noticeable. I knew Fletcher. He'd blame the engineers, maybe fire 1 or 2. He'd never suspect the code itself. He didn't understand it. Sure enough, 3 weeks later, I saw the LinkedIn post. Excited to bring on a new director of engineering as we continue to scale. Translation. The last one took the fall. I almost felt bad. Almost. I ran more tests. Slower pings. Ghost started to look old. Clunky. Meanwhile, Spectre was leaner with every iteration. We onboarded 3 real clients, all under NDA. Two were small SaaS companies. One was a logistics firm that Fletcher had pitched and lost. They never knew Spectre was mine. I never used my real name. But someone else was about to find out. One of Spectre's beta clients was a mid-level developer named Kayla Sharp, cynical and damn good at spotting patterns. She pinged me in our encrypted Slack and said, "Your inference engine feels eerily familiar to something we use at my husband's firm. Any relation?" I froze. Then I typed back, "Let's just say, this version wasn't built by a narcissist with good PR." She didn't reply for 20 minutes. Then, "Oh!" I knew that guy didn't write his own framework. "Girl, you're a ghost." I smiled. "You have no idea." Spectre was gaining traction. Quiet traction. The kind that whispers into investor ears and leaves Fletcher scrambling for answers when user satisfaction starts dipping and no one knows why. He was riding on a ghost. I was building something real. And soon I was going to make sure everyone knew the difference. I started keeping a digital notebook, my own ledger of everything Fletcher had taken and every small win I clawed back. Not out of spite, but strategy. Each log entry had a date, a bullet point, and a measured, emotionless observation. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tracking. Entry, March 12th. Spectre recreated FTR client case study with 97.4% accuracy. Entry, March 22nd, ghost deployment delay. Fee, 6 seconds average latency increase. Entry, April 3rd, FTR shares drop 1.2% after rumors of instability. He didn't see me coming because men like Fletcher never look back. They assume what's behind them is either still following or forgotten. I was neither. The server he thought he'd buried years ago, our original staging environment, still pinged my side channel every time an AI logic table was overwritten. Why? Because I built it that way. Because even when we were married, I didn't fully trust him. That ghost server now served as a mirror reflecting every misstep he made with my code. And it was starting to crack. I could tell because I got a message on LinkedIn from a former FTR data engineer named Malik. "Hey, Alara? Don't know if this is weird, but I'm reaching out because I just left FTR. You didn't hear this from me, but I think someone's been copying your original structure. The predictive model architecture. It's yours. Everyone knows it internally. They just can't say it out loud." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I opened up one of my side project files, something I'd written but never deployed. It was a watchdog script that compared the current behavior of a deployed AI engine to the base ethical parameters it was supposed to follow. Ghost had once been clean, responsible, transparent. Now, Fletcher had stripped out the ethical throttles. The engine was running leaner, faster, but not safer. I triggered a crawler on one of the partner companies that still used Ghost. Within 20 minutes, Spectre flagged a pattern. Predictive hiring algorithms were filtering out candidates based on proxy indicators, zip code, GPA gaps, even browser language preference. It was subtle, but it was illegal. Fletcher had monetized bias, and he didn't even know that his Frankenstein engine was violating federal hiring compliance guidelines. That was when the plan changed. I wasn't just going to win. I was going to expose him. But exposure required precision, not drama. No angry Medium post. No lawsuit that would get buried in court. I needed to feed the truth into the very system he relied on. So I crafted a synthetic dataset, one that mimicked real-world hiring data with strategically placed flags that would activate Ghost's discrimination triggers. I routed the data through a publicly available hiring simulator API, then cross-checked it with Spectre's results. Spectre passed every ethics check. Ghost failed 9 out of 10. I packaged the results into a report. No names. No direct accusations. Just AI bias study. 2025. Then I did what Fletcher never would. I open-sourced the entire toolkit for AI bias detection under the MIT license. It hit GitHub like a lightning bolt. Within a week, engineers from Google, Meta, and independent firms were running my toolkit. They praised it as clean, brilliant, game-changing. Fletcher didn't notice at first, but his clients did. One of his biggest enterprise clients, a Fortune 500 staffing platform, issued a public statement about reviewing third-party automation vendors for ethical compliance. The statement didn't name FTR, but I could feel the ground shifting beneath Fletcher's feet. Then I got a call from a blocked number. I let it ring out. It rang again. Blocked. Then a third time. This time I answered. Hello. A pause. Then, you didn't have to do that. His voice. Fletcher. I didn't respond. He said, Look, we've both moved on. I get that. But dragging me through the mud, I didn't mention your name. You know exactly what you did. I exhaled slowly. Do you? There was a silence that stretched just long enough to feel like a confession. You're still bitter, he said. That made me laugh. A dry, short burst. No, I said. You took everything you thought mattered. I kept the only thing that did. Click. I hung up. I didn't need his voice polluting my plans. That night, Spectre onboarded 2 new clients. One was a competitor Fletcher once mocked at a networking event, said they'd never scale. The other, one of FTR's early beta clients. They were still under Fletcher's NDA, but their CTO told me privately, We're just testing options, in case you know the market shifts. I knew. Oh, I knew. Fletcher had built his company on code he couldn't read and ethics he didn't believe in. And now, with every passing week, I was draining the credibility he pretended to command. Not by hacking him, not by suing him, by simply building something better. I woke up one morning to 78 new emails. No subject lines screamed emergency, but I knew something had changed. I skimmed through them one after another. Security researchers, small firms, automation engineers, all reaching out about the bias detection toolkit I'd released. Some just thanked me. Others shared their own test results using it. And a few asked a very specific question. Do you know who originally built Ghost? That's when I realized the industry had started to connect the dots. Ghost wasn't the invincible black box Fletcher had claimed it was. It had a signature, a design language. And now, with Spectre out in the wild, people were noticing the resemblance, not because it was copied, but because it was clearly an evolution. Ghost was the past. Spectre was the future, and both had my fingerprints. But I didn't reply to those questions. I didn't have to, because people weren't just asking me, they were asking him. A few days later, I saw the first crack in his armor. An awkward 15-second clip from a live podcast interview where Fletcher was asked point blank, So who actually wrote the original framework behind Ghost? He fumbled, said something about a collaborative team, didn't name names, didn't mention me, but the host pushed back. So it wasn't you. Fletcher laughed, nervous. Look, I've always said I surround myself with geniuses. That clip went viral on tech Twitter. I didn't retweet it, but I saved it. Not for revenge. For records. Meanwhile, Spectre's real traction had begun. We secured a partnership with a mid-sized AI ethics firm based in Berlin. They'd been monitoring bias in enterprise platforms for years, but never had a tool they trusted. Now they did. They offered Spectre a contract to integrate across their entire compliance framework. It wasn't a huge payday, but it gave us credibility in Europe, and more importantly, it gave me reach beyond Fletcher's American echo chamber. Then something I hadn't expected happened. One of FTR's investors reached out to me, not through LinkedIn, through a private encrypted Proton mail address. Miss Dwyer, I'm an early stakeholder in FTR. While we're legally bound by confidentiality, I've always appreciated clarity. What exactly is Spectre Labs? I stared at that email for a long time. And then, for the first time in months, I allowed myself a smile. Not the tired smirk I'd been wearing for a year, but a real one. Because I knew what that question really meant. They were nervous. The illusion was cracking. Fletcher had built a house of mirrors, and all I had to do was turn on the light. I replied, Spectre Labs is an ethical automation intelligence platform, and it's mine. That's all you need to know for now. No signature, no links, just truth. 2 weeks later, FTR's stock price dipped 3.9% after a technical report leaked to 2 financial blogs outlining inconsistencies in their core AI model's transparency. The source of the leak was anonymous. I was still here, still quiet, still calculating. That weekend, I flew to New York for a closed-door panel on emerging AI trends in enterprise hiring. I wasn't a speaker. I wasn't even on the program. But Cal, my VC contact, got me an invite and nudged the moderator to allow audience commentary during Q&A. The panel was moderated by an FTR board member, and when it came time for questions, I stood. I didn't identify myself. I didn't raise my voice. I simply asked, "What do you believe is the ethical responsibility of companies when the predictive algorithms they use are discovered to discriminate based on non-explicit variables like zip code or browser settings?" The panelist stumbled through a rehearsed answer about ongoing assessments and regulatory alignment. Then I followed up. Would a company be liable if the algorithm wasn't audited properly, and if that algorithm had been publicly challenged by independent researchers using open source tools? Now the tension in the room turned electric. The moderator tried to move on, but the damage was done. People had heard the question, and more importantly, people had seen who asked it. I didn't leave through the main doors. I took the side exit, walked out into the cold Manhattan wind, and looked up at the skyline. That city had always belonged to the showmen, but maybe now it had room for the architects too. I went back to my hotel, pulled out my laptop, and reviewed Spectre's newest internal analytics. One of our clients just onboarded 3 weeks ago had already routed 1.2 million interactions through our AI. 0 complaints, 0 bias triggers, seamless scaling. I had built something better, and no one could take it from me this time. Fletcher still thought this was about the divorce, but it was never about the marriage. It was about the theft. And I had all the receipts. 3 months after Spectre's official soft launch, I found myself sitting in a glass-walled meeting room at the top floor of a co-working space in Soma, San Francisco. The light poured in from all directions, bouncing off whiteboards scrawled with diagrams and loose acronyms like ML, ESG, and SAS Stack Drift. Across from me sat a group of 4 representatives from Ridgefield Capital, a mid-sized but very aggressive VC firm with a reputation for snapping up ethically driven tech before it went mainstream. They weren't here for a pitch. They were here to acquire Spectre, or more specifically, me. The offer on the table was $12, $6 million for 78% equity and an earnout clause over 4 years. I looked at the folder, then at them. One of the partners slicked back hair, earnest smile, Rolex flashing like a lighthouse. Every time he moved, his hand said, "We believe Spectre has the potential to redefine AI ethics in enterprise workflows. Honestly, you're ahead of the market." "That's rare." I nodded politely. Then I leaned back and asked, "Do you know what FTR is?" They glanced at each other. Of course they did. "We've looked into them," another one said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Because you'll never be able to separate what Spectre is from what FTR pretends to be. They're mirrors now. You acquire me, you inherit that war." Silence. I tapped the folder. "This number is nice, but it's peace money, and I'm not done fighting." They didn't argue. They respected it, and they knew the truth. Fletcher's empire had already started leaking. What I didn't tell them, what no one in that room knew, was that FTR was running on borrowed time because I had something Fletcher didn't even know existed. I called it the Loopback. It was a script I embedded in Ghost's earliest build, a diagnostic tool originally designed to self-check data integrity and log anomalies over time. But it could also do one other thing: trace recursive logic behaviors tied to system updates. Basically, I could prove when and how Fletcher's team modified the code from my original work. It wouldn't hold up in court as sole evidence, but it would bury him in a PR firestorm if published alongside Spectre's flawless ethical performance. I had never planned to use it, but now I wasn't so sure. Later that night, I got a text from Cal. "He's prepping for IPO. Roadshow starts in 6 weeks. You sure you're not going to blow it up?" I stared at the screen. 6 weeks? 6 weeks until he rang the bell on Wall Street and took credit for everything. I typed, "What if I rang it first?" Cal replied with just one emoji. Tuh. The next morning, I booked a domain. Divorced but dangerous. Not for Spectre. Not for a product. For a story. A reveal. I started outlining a blog post, long-form, deeply technical, dispassionately factual. Not a hit piece. A history. With receipts, citations, diagrams, commit hashes, timestamps. It wasn't slander if it was true. But I didn't hit publish. Not yet. Instead, I focused on finalizing Spectre's next update, version 2. One would allow clients to run self-audits on their AI pipelines with visual breakdowns of predictive patterns and internal decision trees, something Ghost had never been able to do. Because Ghost was built to hide, Spectre was built to reveal. The contrast wasn't just ethical, it was evolutionary. A few days later, an engineer from a recruiting firm in Austin posted a public review of Spectre's beta toolkit on a private Slack community. It's like Spectre wants to be questioned. It dares you to test it. Transparent AF. That single comment got screenshotted, tweeted, and reposted across Reddit and Hacker News within hours. One reply said, "This feels like the anti-ghost. Wonder who built it." Another, "Fletcher's about to get outplayed by his ghost." I didn't respond. But I watched the views climb, watched the narrative shift, and watched Fletcher do something he never did before. Acknowledge a problem publicly? He posted a thread on X, formerly Twitter. Transparency is at the heart of FTR Technologies. We hear the feedback, and we're working on a new initiative to open up our AI ethics architecture in Q3. I stared at that line for a long time. It was the first time Fletcher had blinked. I opened my drawer and pulled out a piece of paper I hadn't touched in almost a year, our divorce decree. The part that stung most wasn't the property list or the $0 spousal support. It was this line: both parties waive future claims to intellectual contributions not formally registered under their individual names. He thought that meant I'd stay quiet. What he never understood is that silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's strategy, sometimes it's a countdown. And mine had just reached 0. There are things you do in the dark that feel like secrets. Then there are things you do in the light that look like secrets because no one's paying attention. I started the final countdown to Fletcher's collapse on a bright Wednesday morning with a single press release. Spectre Labs announced its partnership with the Federal Technology Ethics Coalition, a small but vocal regulatory body that had been lobbying for transparency legislation in AI decision-making tools. The headline was simple: Spectre Labs to provide open-source diagnostic tools for federal AI oversight pilots. No drama, no big splash, just public verifiable alignment with watchdogs who had teeth. Within an hour, the press release hit 3 minor outlets. A few investors noticed, but by the end of the week it had traveled farther than I expected, picked up by a niche tech policy newsletter, then amplified by 2 AI think tanks. And then it landed in Fletcher's lap. I knew because 3 days later I received an email from his lawyer. Subject: Notice of cease and desist. The body was 4 paragraphs of vaguely threatening legal posturing, alleging possible misappropriation of proprietary code and intent to confuse the public through competing technology branding. I laughed when I read it, because what Fletcher didn't understand, what his lawyers didn't understand, was that he was the one standing on stolen ground. I forwarded the email to my IP counsel with a single line: "Time to unseal the package." That package had been sitting in a cloud drive under 2-factor encryption since the day after our divorce was finalized. It contained the original Ghost build and all commits with timestamps, the sandbox environment logs showing my branch diverged before FTR's incorporation, system diagnostics from the loopback protocol documenting every deviation from the original ethical constraints, screenshots from Slack conversations, old emails, even a photo of the whiteboard where I first mapped the recursive learning cycle, complete with Fletcher's initials in the corner, praising my brilliant baby AI. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a ledger of truth, and I knew exactly how to make it count. So I didn't respond to Fletcher's lawyer directly. I just published a 5,000-word case study on Divorced But Dangerous, AI titled From Ghost to Spectre: The Story of a Hijacked Algorithm. I didn't mention Fletcher by name. I didn't have to. Anyone with Google and a memory could connect the dots. I also didn't launch it on social media. I sent it anonymously to 5 tech journalists. I trusted 5 people who had quietly followed my career even after I disappeared from the scene. 2 responded. 1 wrote back: "If even half of this is true, it's the biggest quiet IP scandal in years." The story hit Medium within 48 hours under the title, "She Built the AI. He took the credit. Now she's back. It exploded. Reddit, Twitter, LinkedIn, even a 3-minute TikTok summary that ended with, "Moral of the story. Don't steal from your wife if she builds smarter machines than you." I watched from a cafe window as the world began to notice not me necessarily, but the truth. I sipped my coffee and refreshed the stock ticker for FTR Technologies. It had dropped 1% in pre-market trading. By noon, it was 11%. I got a text from Cal. He just canceled his third investor lunch. Boards in lockdown. Holy suds, Ilara! But I wasn't done. That afternoon, I authorized Spectre's public beta for Spectre Insight, our AI audit visualization tool that let clients see exactly how their decisions were being made by automation. We opened the API to developers, researchers, even students. Within hours, users were tweeting videos showing how Spectre revealed bias, while Ghost failed silent. One user called it the AI that tells on itself, built by someone who clearly got burned and got better. Fletcher released a statement the next day. It was filled with fluff about respecting creators and rethinking internal governance. But it was too late. The air had shifted. His name was no longer synonymous with brilliance. It was synonymous with theft. At 3:42 p.m., I received another email, this one from a general partner at FTR's lead investor firm. It said, "Would you consider a conversation about board restructuring? We believe your perspective could help us stabilize the company's future." I read it 3 times. Then I laughed quietly from somewhere deep in my chest. The same people who once toasted Fletcher for being the next Musk were now inviting me back into the house he built on my blueprint. But I wasn't interested in stabilizing Fletcher. I was interested in surpassing him. And now the world was finally watching. Fletcher had built his kingdom on Flash. Polished decks, loud panels, breathless blog posts about the humanity of artificial intelligence. But the thing about Flash is it doesn't last under pressure. It flickers. It burns out. Mine was built on something else. Quiet execution. The week after the article dropped, Spectre saw more traction than in its entire lifetime. 5 new enterprise onboarding requests. 3 requests for white-labeled solutions. 2 offers to license our audit interface. But the most satisfying message came from an unexpected source. A whistleblower. A mid-level product manager from FTR messaged me using a burner Proton Mail account. Her name was Ria. She had been with the company for 2 years, and in her words, "I've watched them patch over your architecture with garbage because they didn't know how it worked. The system's breaking, Alara. I thought you should know they've got a crisis team meeting every day now. Everyone's pretending they understand the core engine, but they don't, because it was yours." I sat back in my chair and let that sink in. Fletcher wasn't just exposed. He was out of time. But I didn't reply to Ria yet. Instead, I turned my attention to a message waiting in my inbox. A media request from The Gridline, a popular video docuseries focused on tech founders who had quietly changed the game. They wanted to feature Spectre, me. They called it "The Founder Who Was Erased." I should have felt vindicated. But part of me hesitated. Not because I was afraid. Because I knew what Fletcher would do next. He wouldn't admit defeat. Not publicly. Men like him don't. Instead, he'd perform repentance. Issue soft mea culpas. Position himself as a misunderstood visionary caught in a narrative hijack. He'd try to spin the story. And right on cue, he posted a personal blog entry titled, "Lessons from a Breakneck Build." What I'd do differently. He didn't name me. But he referenced early contributors who shaped the foundation, see. He claimed the company had outgrown its origin story, and that transparency was a journey, not a switch. Translation: I'm not guilty. I'm just evolved. It was disgusting, but I didn't bite. Instead, I made a phone call to Kayla, the early Spectre beta user, whose husband still worked at FTR. She picked up on the second ring. "You ready to drop it?" She asked, no greeting needed. "Not yet," I said. "But I need one more thing." I laid it out. I wanted a snapshot of Ghost's current behavior under stress. Not the public API, the internal model flow. If she could get me logs from one high-traffic client during peak hours, I could prove Ghost was still failing basic ethical constraints. She didn't hesitate. "Give me 2 days." It took her 1. The files were clean, timestamped, and damning. The decision tree showed a clear pattern of racial and socioeconomic bias during candidate screening. The sort of flaw that in the wrong hands or worse, the right hands could spark a congressional inquiry. It was time. I sent the files to 3 journalists, an ethics coalition, and 1 regulatory contact I'd quietly built rapport with over the past 6 months. All of them received it under embargo, but I also uploaded the documents to Divorced But Dangerous. With a new header, Ghost in the Machine, the unethical heart of FTR. Then I made 1 phone call. To Fletcher. I didn't owe him that. But this wasn't about courtesy. This was about control. He picked up. He always did when things were bad. Ilara, he said, and I could hear it in his voice, the strain. The collapse. I assume you've seen the traffic numbers. You made your point. I let the silence answer him. Then I said, I'm not making a point. He didn't reply. I'm correcting the record. I continued. You erased me. You presented my work as a finished product wrapped in your voice, sold in your name. But now the world is watching. And they know. You'll kill the IPO, he said barely above a whisper. No, I said. You did. I hung up. And then I opened my laptop and published the final entry on the site. A message not for Fletcher, but for the engineers, the coders, the quiet builders who saw themselves in my story. Your silence is not invisibility. Your work has weight. And if someone takes it, there is always a way back. That post was shared more than anything else I had written. Within 48 hours, FTR's IPO was suspended. The SEC issued an inquiry. Fletcher stepped down as CEO for personal reasons. And me, I didn't go on TV. I didn't attend panels. I just kept building. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't building in someone's shadow. I was building in my own name. The day Fletcher resigned, a notification popped up on my phone while I was slicing an orange in my kitchen. No alarms. No victory music. Just a headline. FTR CEO steps down amid ongoing ethics investigation. I stared at the words for a moment, feeling nothing. No rush. No dopamine hit. Just a quiet click inside my head. A gear locking into place. It was done. He was out. But this wasn't the end. Because while Fletcher had been busy scrambling to salvage his public image, I had been building something bigger than revenge. A framework not just for Spectre, but for every builder who'd ever been erased by someone louder. I called it Mirror Protocol. A set of open-source guidelines, tools, and templates that developers could embed into their work. Digital fingerprints to quietly prove authorship, protect contributions, and expose tampering without legal teams or courtroom drama. Mirror wasn't flashy. It didn't break the internet. But within days, it was forked by 4 universities, added to 2 dev toolkits, and mentioned in a white paper from MIT. It was my real answer to Fletcher, not a takedown, a blueprint. Let him spin on CNBC. Let his PR team release statements about leadership transitions and renewed focus. I was building the ground he would never walk on again. Meanwhile, Spectre had evolved into more than a company. It had become a movement. Small dev teams and ethics committees started reaching out not just to use our tools, but to build on them. The open audit framework we'd released was being adapted for healthcare insurance, even criminal justice tech. It was surreal. One night, as I reviewed the GitHub contributions piling up from people across the world, I felt the weight of it. The thing that had been stolen from me had not only returned, it had multiplied. Spectre wasn't a product anymore. It was proof. Proof that what I built mattered. Proof that erasure wasn't the end. That same week, I got a call from Dina Morales, the executive director of the Federal Tech Accountability Office, the same agency Spectre had partnered with weeks before. Ilara, she said, we'd like to invite you to Washington. There's a new advisory committee being formed on AI compliance standards. Your name came up. I hesitated. Government panels weren't my style. But the truth was, I wasn't hiding anymore. And if I didn't take the seat, someone like Fletcher might slither into it. I'll do it, I said. She exhaled in relief. Good. You're the only one who isn't afraid to call a machine out for lying. That night, I walked the streets of San Francisco alone. I passed the cafe where Fletcher and I used to pitch VCs, past the park where I'd once cried into my scarf because a funding round fell through. past the window of an office building where in another timeline we might have shared a logo on the door. But now I didn't want that logo. I had mine. I had Spectre. And more importantly, I had myself. The version of me that never gave in to bitterness. The version that built and kept building. The version that understood silence could be more powerful than rage, because silence wielded right becomes control. So when people ask me now, was it worth it? All the secrecy, the long game. I say, absolutely, because I didn't just win. I redefined what winning looks like. It's not about the money or the press. It's about walking into a room and knowing everything inside it exists because you refuse to disappear. And if you're listening to this, maybe that's the story you needed. Because if you've ever been erased by a partner, a boss, a system, understand this. You're still here, and your story isn't over. 6 months after Fletcher's resignation, Spectre was no longer being whispered about in closed circles. It was front and center at every ethics-forward tech conference in the country. I wasn't on billboards. I didn't want to be, but I was on panels and headlines, and most importantly in code. I sat on a stage in Chicago beside executives from IBM Stanford's AI lab and the Department of Justice, calmly walking them through the difference between transparency theater and real accountability. My slides were clean. My voice didn't tremble. I didn't quote dramatic origin stories or mention Fletcher's name. I spoke in metrics outcomes frameworks. Afterward, 3 women from a cybersecurity firm approached me and said, "We know what you did. And we've been waiting to meet someone like you." I knew what they meant. They didn't mean the exposé. They meant surviving the silencing. You see, the thing no one tells you about erasure is that it's lonely, not in a sobbing on the floor way, but in the quiet, sterile moments where you wonder if you imagined it all. Did I really write the first 4,000 lines of Ghost? Did he really credit himself in that pitch? Did I really sit across from investors pretending we were equals? Yes, I did, but now I didn't have to justify it. Because I had built something that spoke for itself. Spectre had become the new industry default for AI auditability. Companies that once chased scale at all costs were now whispering about Spectre compatibility. Engineers added Spectre tested to their resumes. Dev blogs ran think pieces about Spectre's quiet rebellion. And still I kept moving. That's the thing about building in silence for so long. It rewires your brain, makes you allergic to noise. You stop needing applause because the code works. The results speak, the quiet speaks. But there was one final thread to tie off, one that had been tugging at me since the day I published that first case study. The patent. When Fletcher filed the Ghost patent under his name, he used my early drafts as supplemental research. He had never credited me. Legally, I had waived my right to challenge it in the divorce. But something had changed. A clause buried deep in the FTR investor contract stated that if the CEO was found to have submitted knowingly false IP ownership during company formation, the patent would be subject to re-examination. And now that he was gone, the board wanted closure. So they called me. Their general counsel, stern voice, too many syllables, asked if I would participate in a voluntary IP audit. She emphasized it wasn't punitive, just a formal process to clear the company's books before any restructuring. I said yes. But I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for every builder who's been left off the byline. They flew me out to New York. Quiet hotel. Quiet room. I sat across from 2 lawyers and an IP examiner. I brought copies of my commit history, my original repo logs, photos of old whiteboards, Slack archives, emails from Fletcher with phrases like, "Your algorithm is a freakin' miracle, Alara." I laid it all out like a blueprint. They said nothing for a long time, just took notes. Then the examiner said, "This is definitive." I nodded. No joy, no triumph, just facts. I signed one form and left. A week later, I received an email from the patent office. Subject: patent reattribution complete. My name was now on the original Ghost patent. Legally. Permanently. It didn't make me rich. It made me right. I didn't tell anyone. No press release. No tweet storm. I just added it to the bottom of my Spectre profile. Co-creator of Ghost AI reattributed 2026. That one line did more for me than any revenge arc ever could. Because it wasn't about humiliation, it was about record correction. And once the record is corrected, you don't owe anyone anything else. You just keep building. By the time Spectre turned 1 year old, it was in over 70 companies, 3 continents, and embedded in 2 government-backed pilot programs for AI ethics compliance. I had 14 employees. Not a massive team, not a unicorn. But they were brilliant. Half of them were women. 2 of them were moms who coded during nap time. One was a 19-year-old autodidact who reverse-engineered Spectre's core inference model before he ever applied. We worked quietly, met remotely, and built relentlessly. No flashy retreats, no TikTok ads, just results. And we were profitable. I still didn't own a house. Still lived in a minimalist apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and one good espresso machine. My desk faced east so I could catch the sunrise while debugging. Because in the quiet, before the world wakes up, I feel the most like her, the woman Fletcher tried to erase. But there was something else brewing. Spectre wasn't just running smoothly. It was spooking competitors. Ghost, despite Fletcher's exit, had begun to visibly unravel. Clients complained about false positives latency, strange recommendation loops. FTR issued update after update, patches, rollbacks, overcorrections. But the truth was simple. They didn't understand the engine anymore. Because the only person who did was gone. Me. One evening, while reviewing a beta integration report from a healthcare client, I noticed something odd. Spectre had outperformed its benchmark by over 38%, especially in high-volume intake decisions. I triple-checked the logs. The system had self-optimized in a way I hadn't explicitly trained it for. It had learned how to flag bias in human behavior before it ever reached the dataset. My system had learned to detect intent. I sat back stunned. This wasn't some Skynet moment. It wasn't dangerous. It was evolution. I wrote down a note in my personal journal, just 6 words. Spectre sees what we deny ourselves. It scared me a little, but it also thrilled me, because now for the first time, the tool I had built in pain had transcended it. Spectre was no longer just a weapon to fight Fletcher. It had become something that might actually change things. And with that realization came clarity. The final move. I scheduled a private meeting with Cal. We met at a bookstore cafe in Palo Alto, quiet, tucked behind shelves of used philosophy texts and dog-eared sci-fi. No cameras, no partners, just the 2 of us. I'm spinning off Mirror Protocol, I told him. He blinked. As its own entity, I nodded. Nonprofit. Global charter. I want every underrepresented dev, every kid building something real to have protection built into their code from day one. He leaned back, smiled slowly. You always were 5 moves ahead. No, I said. I just remember what it felt like to be 1 behind. We finalized the paperwork a month later. Mirror Protocol Foundation launched quietly, but within weeks, dev communities started adopting it like a badge of honor. Mirror Protected became a statement like saying, my work is mine. I know how to prove it. Try me. That's when something strange started happening. Fletcher emailed me. Not a threat. Not even a plea. Just 1 line. Congratulations. You built what I only pitched. I didn't reply. I just archived it. Because by now I didn't need the last word. The work was the word, and the work had gone farther than either of us ever dreamed. The funny thing about revenge is people expect fire, but I gave them a mirror. And that's how I won. Some victories arrive like a parade confetti applause headlines. Mine arrived in a PDF. It was a quarterly industry report issued by the Global Institute for Automated Intelligence. Page 47. Section header. Spectre Labs now recognized as the emerging ethical standard for enterprise AI deployment. Beneath it, charts, citations, testimonials from CTOs I'd never met, but who had reshaped their companies based on tools I built on a mattress with a borrowed laptop and a USB drive full of my past life. That night, I sat on my balcony, knees pulled up to my chest, wrapped in a sweater that still smelled faintly like soldered wires and late-night code. I watched the city lights flicker, and I let myself feel it. Relief. Not because I'd beaten Fletcher, but because the silence was finally mine. But peace for someone like me isn't a full stop. It's a pivot. So I turned to what came next. We started beta testing Spectre Core, an AI ethics layer that sits above other models like a conscience built into the infrastructure. It didn't replace models. It audited them in real time, flagging ethical risks and providing correction protocols midstream. It was radical. The kind of tool that didn't just win you contracts, it made governments nervous. We deployed it quietly in 3 places: a logistics firm, a regional bank, and a nonprofit school district system. Within weeks, the reports came back. Spectre Core didn't just work, it transformed. It stopped auto approvals for discriminatory credit assessments. It flagged scheduling biases against single parents. It rerouted supply chain decisions that would have burdened already disadvantaged neighborhoods. I read the feedback reports like love letters. Not to me, but to the version of me who once sat across from a man who said, "You're too emotional for the technical lead. Investors prefer confidence." Well, turns out they also prefer results. And confidence. Mine didn't look like Fletcher's podium charm. It looked like code that couldn't lie. That's the version of me I built from the ashes. But Spectre's growth brought something else: imitation. Competitors started slapping the word ethical on everything. Transparent AI, bias-neutral layers. Most of it was marketing, and some of it looked suspiciously like mine. So I reactivated Loopback, not on Ghost, on them. I embedded a subtle tracker in Mirror Protocol's public builds, a kind of forensic watermark. Anyone copying our core logic would trip it. 2 did. I didn't send cease and desist letters. I sent emails offering integration partnerships with licensing. They agreed, because Spectre wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a framework, a brand, a force, a warning. Then something unexpected happened. I was nominated for Time's Innovators to Watch list. I almost declined. But one of my engineers, Layla, a 26-year-old second-generation Iranian American, who'd once whispered, "Thank you for hiring me," when no one else would, pulled me aside and said, "You have to accept. Not for Fletcher. For us." So I said yes. I wore a black suit. No dress. No frills. Just clean lines and presence. And on stage, when they handed me the little crystal plaque, I gave a speech that was exactly 58 seconds long. I didn't come here to be visible. I came here to make what's invisible undeniable. Let's build systems that don't just work, but tell the truth, even when no one's watching. Applause, cameras, flash, and then quiet again. Where I do my best work, after the Time feature, the world got louder. PR requests, keynote invitations, brand deals, even a serialized podcast offer titled Ghostwriter, the woman who coded revenge. I turned most of them down, not because I wasn't grateful, but because I never wanted to be a symbol. Symbols get commodified, misquoted, flattened. And I didn't spend a decade being invisible just to be turned into a hashtag. What I wanted, what I built for, was permanence. Systems that didn't need me in front of a camera to keep working. That's why Spectre Labs never became Alara Dwyer Technologies. It stayed Spectre. A presence, a shadow, a truth. But something shifted inside me during those months. For the first time in a long time, I let myself stop sprinting. I took long walks in the early morning. I read books that had nothing to do with algorithms, memoirs, poetry, even fiction. I remembered who I had been before Fletcher, before Ghost. I also started writing again, not code, not white papers, but essays. Personal ones. Pieces about integrity in building. About the sacred private work of creators. About how sometimes what we build is the only real evidence that we existed, especially when the world tries to erase us. I published them quietly under a pseudonym. They still found readers. Some even found themselves in my words. And that was enough. But the past has a way of circling back when it's done festering. It came in the form of a letter, a real printed envelope, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "Ilara, I've stepped away from tech, sold everything. I live by the coast now. I know it's too late for sorry, but I wanted you to know. I was always afraid of how much better you were. You didn't destroy me. You just showed me the truth." I read it once. Then I folded it carefully and slid it into the back of an old journal, the same one that once held lines like "Find a lawyer," "Clone the server," "Never forget." Now it held closure, not forgiveness, not erasure, but acknowledgement, and that was rare and valuable. Later that night, I sat at my desk, Spectre's next rollout roadmap glowing on one monitor, a cup of lavender tea beside me, and I thought about how strange it was that the man who tried to take everything had unknowingly handed me something even more powerful: motive. And with it, I'd built not just a company or a protocol or a story. I'd built a legacy, one line of code at a time, in the silence, in the dark, until the world had no choice but to listen. There's something poetic about becoming the thing they never expected you to survive as. Not a cautionary tale, not a tragic genius, but an infrastructure. In the 13th month after Spectre launched, I got word that the Global Ethics Consortium, a newly formed alliance of regulators, engineers, legal experts, and ethicists, had drafted a policy standard based largely on the Mirror Protocol structure. They called it the Alara Principle. I didn't cry, but I stared at the email for a long time. Not because I wanted the attention, but because I remembered the first time Fletcher called me by my codename in our shared repo. E short for Alara, short for the ghost behind the screen. At the time, it felt endearing. Now, I'd worn the shadow so long it had become armor. The principle, as they described it, required three things from any AI deployed in high-impact systems: visible authorship. All code must include immutable authorship logs, ethical mirrors, real-time auditability of AI decisions in human-readable form, consent layering. End users must be able to opt in or out of automated decisions. It was everything Ghost had never had. Everything I had once been told was too complicated, too idealistic, or bad for the user journey. And now it was law. In 3 countries, pending in 5 more. That night, we held a quiet celebration, just my team, on a group video call, holding up glasses of whatever we were drinking. Tea, wine, coffee. One person had a milkshake. We didn't toast to me. We toasted to the builders, the quiet ones. The ones who wrote truth into code and got cut out of the launch photos. Here's to the ghosts, I said. Long may they haunt. They laughed, but it stuck. It became a Spectre Labs tradition. Every successful rollout, every new protocol adopted, long may they haunt. Because legacy isn't about your name on the plaque. It's about the systems that still whisper your signature long after they tried to wipe you out. Still, as Spectre scaled, the temptation grew louder. Big firms knocking, acquisition offers, merger requests. Even one from a European company run by a woman who had clearly read every line of my case study and still wanted to own the narrative instead of honoring it. I declined, graciously. But I never explained why, because I didn't need to. The people who got it already knew. Spectre was never built for exit. It was built for endurance. And now I had endurance too. I wasn't exhausted anymore. I wasn't angry. I was steady. One morning, I opened my inbox to find an invitation to guest lecture at my alma mater. They wanted me to teach a single seminar, Building While Erased, Authorship IP and the Quiet Architecture of Innovation. I stared at the subject line and felt something strange stir in me. Pride. Not that I was being asked, but that I had something to say. Something earned, something endured. I said yes, and when I stood in front of 30-some students, half of them women, a third of them immigrants, all of them hungry, I said, don't wait for credit to build something that matters. Build it so well they can't ignore you. And when they do, build again, silently if you have to, until the silence speaks louder than they ever did. The lecture hall was quiet when I finished. Not in that awkward, hesitant way, but in that absorbing way, where words don't need follow-up, just space. I left the room and walked the old campus paths I hadn't seen in years. The same cracked concrete where I once rushed to 8A, Comp Sci classes with headphones in and no sleep. The same quad where I once sat under a tree, sketching neural architectures in a paper notebook Fletcher said no investor would care about. Turns out they cared. Just not when he told them. I visited the old lab, too, tucked behind the new AI center they'd built with venture funding from alumni who had never written a line of code in their lives. It smelled the same. Ozone whiteboard markers, bad coffee. One of the students had written on a corkboard near the door, "Spectre Ghost! Long may they haunt." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I just stood there and let it happen. When I got back to my apartment that night, there was a package waiting for me. No return address. Inside, a small engraved plaque. Spectre Core, AI Ethics Award winner, Year 1. For building the system no one thought they'd need until they did. The card was unsigned, but the seal on the envelope was embossed with a familiar logo. The same investment group that once backed FTR. The same firm that had dropped Fletcher after the exposé. Maybe it was a quiet apology, or maybe just respect. Either way, I accepted it and placed the plaque on the shelf beside my desk. Not in front, beside, because this was never about being seen first. It was about being right, about being true, about lasting. In the weeks that followed, I finalized the rollout of Spectre Core 3.0, which now included the ability for systems to explain their decisions in plain language, even ones with complex multivariable logic, not summaries. Explanations. It was the holy grail of AI accountability. And it worked. Clients were stunned. Engineers skeptical until they ran it and saw it return readable sentences like, "This candidate was deprioritized due to a 36-month employment gap not based on zip code or age. This route was delayed due to external congestion data, not internal driver history. This user flag was a result of inconsistent input behavior, not location bias." It didn't just make decisions transparent. It gave them a voice, not a robotic one, a truthful one. And somehow that final piece brought everything full circle. Because long before I ever sat across a courtroom, before I lost the house, before the betrayal, the lies, the silent rebuilding, I remember telling Fletcher something once, while we were prototyping Ghost. "You can't fix what you can't name," I said. Back then he nodded, agreed, then stole it all. Now, my system names everything. It has no shame, no secrets, no PR script. It just tells the truth every single time. And maybe that's why I kept going. Because in a world where truth gets packaged and softened and spun, I built something that refuses to lie quietly. Just like me, I always knew this story wouldn't end with confetti. No cinemática crescendo. No podium speech. Just silence. The kind I had learned to live inside. The kind I owned. It was late when I walked into the Spectre office one last time, before our transition to full remote. We'd voted unanimously no more HQ, no more desks. We didn't need walls to build. We never did. The office was quiet, empty. Just a few labeled boxes stacked near the door. I stood by the server rack I once fought to keep powered through blackout startup chaos and breakups, both romantic and professional. I placed my hand on the casing like it was an old friend, because it held the ghosts of my work, my proofs, my pain. And now, it was going dark. Spectre 4.0 had just launched. Fully decentralized, unkillable, no single owner, no single point of failure, not even me. We had become the thing we were meant to be. The system they couldn't shut down. Later that night, I sat alone on my balcony. Wind brushing against my face, the city far below pulsing like a low heartbeat. I had no plans to raise another round. No roadmap beyond the next set of updates. No exit strategy, because I'd already exited the thing that mattered most. The need to prove anything. To him, to them, to anyone. Now I just built. That's it. That's the revenge. Not wealth, not fame, but clarity. I pulled out the last journal I'd been keeping. Only a few pages left. I flipped to the back and wrote in slow, careful pen. He left me nothing in the divorce. But I owned the AI that made his company rich. I didn't take it back with lawyers. I didn't scream. I just built something better. And I let the world find out on its own time. Then I closed the journal. And for the first time in a decade, I slept without waking up once. This is the story of how I was erased, stripped of credit, of equity, of voice, by a man who thought charm was the same thing as genius. Fletcher left me with nothing in the divorce. No house, no shares, no legacy. Except, he forgot one thing. I had written the AI, the algorithm behind his billion-dollar company. That was mine. While he stood on stages and made promises, I sat alone in a rental with a borrowed laptop and rebuilt what he stole piece by piece. I didn't scream. I didn't sue. I just built, and the more I built, the more the world began to see the cracks in his story. One expose, one open source toolkit, one whistleblower, and then spectacle. But this was never about revenge. It was about record correction, about building something so real, so undeniable, that they couldn't ignore me even if they wanted to. I created Spectre not just an AI, but a movement, a mirror that forces systems to face what they'd rather hide. A legacy built from silence, precision, and long memory. And I didn't do it in spite of what he took from me. I did it because of it. So if you've ever been erased, forgotten, pushed out, know this: you can rebuild. And sometimes, the rebuild is the revenge. Like this story, subscribe to hear the next quiet revenge that shook everything. Because the ghosts we become are often the architects of the future. End of script. Good night.